from Paper Towns, a book by John Green. So, Margot and I were 9. Our parents were friends, so we would sometimes play together, biking past the cul-de-sac streets to Jefferson Park itself, the hub in our subdivision's proverbial wheel. I always got very nervous whenever I heard that Margot was about to show up, on account of how she was the most fantastically gorgeous creature that God ever created. On the morning in question, she wore white shorts and a pink t-shirt that featured a green dragon breathing a fire with orange glitter. It is difficult to explain how awesome I found this t-shirt at the time. Margot was always biked standing up, her arms locked as she leaned over the handlebars, her purple sneakers a surreptitious blur. It was a steam-hot day in March. The sky was clear, but the air tasted acidic, like it might storm later. At the time, I fancied myself an inventor, and after we locked up our bikes and began the short walk across the park to the playground, I told Margot about an idea I had for an invention called the Ring-O-Lator. The Ring-O-Lator was a gigantic cannon that would shoot big, colored rocks into a very low orbit, giving Earth the same sort of rings that Saturn has. I still think this would be a fine idea, but it turns out that building a cannon that can shoot boulders into low orbit is fairly complicated. I'd been in this park so many times before that it was mapped in my mind, so we were only a few steps inside when I began to sense that the world was out of order, even though I couldn't immediately figure out what was different. Quentin, Margot said quietly, calmly. She was pointing, and then I realized what was different. There was a live oak a few feet ahead of us, thick and gnarled and ancient looking. That was not new. The playground on our right, not new either. But now, a guy wearing a gray suit slumped against the trunk of the oak tree, not moving. This was new. He was encircled by blood, a half-dried fountain of it poured out of his mouth. The mouth open in a way that mouths generally shouldn't be. Flies at rest on his pale forehead. He's dead, Margot said, as if I couldn't tell. I took 2 small steps backward. I remember thinking that if I made any sudden movements, he might wake up and attack me. Maybe he was a zombie. I knew zombies weren't real, but he sure looked like a potential zombie. As I took those 2 steps back, Margot took 2 equally small and quiet steps forward. His eyes are open, she said. We gotta go home, I said. I thought you closed your eyes when you died, she said. Margot, we gotta go home and tell him. She took another step. She was close enough and I would reach out and touch his foot. What do you think happened to him, she asked. Maybe he was drugs or something? I didn't want to leave Margot alone with the dead guy who might be an attack zombie, but I also didn't care to stand around and chat about the circumstance of his demise. I gathered my courage and stepped forward to take her hand. Margot, we gotta go now! Okay, yeah, she said. We ran to our bikes, my stomach churning with something that felt exactly like excitement, but wasn't. We got on our bikes, and I let her go in front of me because I was crying and I didn't want her to see. I could see blood on the soles of her purple sneakers. His blood, the dead guy's blood. And then we were back at home in our separate houses. My parents called 911, and I heard sirens in the distance and asked to see the fire trucks, but my mom said no. Then I took a nap. Both my parents are therapists, which means that I am really goddamn well adjusted. So when I woke up, I had a long conversation with my mom about the cycle of life and how death is a part of life, but not a part of life I needed to be particularly concerned about at the age of 9. And I felt better, honestly. I never worried about it much, which is saying something because I can do some worrying. Here's the thing. I found a dead guy. Little, adorable 9-year-old me and my even littler and more adorable playdate found a guy with blood pouring out of his mouth, and that blood was on her little, adorable sneakers as we biked home. It's all very dramatic and everything, but so what? I didn't know the guy. People I don't know die all the damn time. If I had a nervous breakdown every time something awful happened in the world, I'd be crazier than a shithouse rat. That night, I went into my room at 9 o'clock to go to bed, because 9 o'clock was my bedtime. My mom tucked me in, told me she loved me, and I said, "See you tomorrow." And she said, "See you tomorrow." And then she turned out the lights and closed the door, almost all the way. As I turned on my side, I saw Margot Roth Spiegelman standing outside my window, her face almost pressed against the screen. I got up and opened the window, but the screen stayed between us, pixelating her. "I did an investigation," she said, quite seriously. Even up close, the screen broke her face apart, but I could tell that she was holding a little notebook and a pencil with teeth marks around the eraser. She glanced down at her notes. Mrs. Feldman from over on Jefferson Court said his name was Robert Joyner. She told me he lived on Jefferson Road in one of those condos in the grocery store. So I went over there, and there were a bunch of policemen, and one of them asked if I worked at the school paper. And I said our school didn't have a paper, and he said as long as I wasn't a journalist, he would answer my questions. He said Robert Joyner was 36 years old, a lawyer. They wouldn't let me into the apartment, but a lady named Juanita Alvarez lives next door to him, and I got into her apartment by asking if I could borrow a cup of sugar. And then she said that Robert Joyner had killed himself with a gun. And I asked why, and she told me that he was getting a divorce and was sad about it. She stopped then, and I just looked at her, her face gray and moonlit and split into 1,000 little pieces by the weave of the window screen. Her wide, round eyes flitted back and forth from her notebook to me. Lots of people get divorces and don't kill themselves, I said. I know, she said, excitement in her voice. That's what I told Juanita Alvarez. And then she said, or I looked at the notebook page, she said that Mr. Joyner was troubled. And then I asked what that meant, and she told me that we should just pray for him, and that I needed to take the sugar to my mom. And I said, forget the sugar, and left. I said nothing again. I just wanted her to keep talking, that small voice tense with the excitement of almost knowing things, making me feel like something important was happening to me. I think maybe I know why, she finally said. Why? Maybe all the strings inside him broke, she said. While I tried to think of something to say in answer to that, I reached forward and pressed the lock on the screen between us, dislodging it from the window. I placed the screen on the floor, but she didn't give me a chance to speak. Before I could sit back down, she just raised her face up toward me and whispered, "Shut the window." So I did. I thought she would leave, but she just stood there watching me. I waved at her and smiled, but her eyes seemed fixed on something behind me, something monstrous that had already drained the blood from her face. I felt too afraid to turn around and see. There was nothing behind me, of course, except maybe the big guy. I stopped waiting. My head was level with hers as we stared at each other from opposite sides of the glass. I don't remember how it ended, if I went to bed or she did. In my memory, it doesn't end. We just stay there looking at each other. Margot always loved mysteries, and in everything that came afterward, I could never stop thinking that maybe she loved mysteries so much that she became one.